Your medicine cabinet is in the wrong room. Everything you've been paying a copay to manage. Something in your kitchen already handles better. 44 items. Let's go. 1. You already know garlic makes food taste better, and you've probably heard someone claim it's good for you. In the vague, unverifiable way, people say things like, fresh air is healing. Here's what nobody bothered to tell you. Garlic is one of the most clinically validated antimicrobial, cardiovascular, and immune-modulating substances on the planet, and it costs less than $1 a bulb. The active compound is called allicin, and here's the part most people completely miss. It doesn't exist in whole garlic. Your body can't extract it from an intact clove. Allicin is only produced when you crush or chop the clove, triggering a chemical reaction between two compounds stored in separate cellular compartments. That's the plant's defense mechanism. Damage it, and it arms itself. Leave it whole, and you're basically eating expensive breath poison with no pharmacological upside. Once you produce allicin correctly, the evidence gets genuinely hard to ignore. Multiple randomized controlled trials show garlic supplementation reduces systolic blood pressure by an average of 8 to 9 millimeters of mercury in hypertensive patients. Results that sit in the same range as first-line pharmaceutical intervention. A 12-week study found participants taking aged garlic extract had 63% fewer colds than the placebo group, and when they did get sick, symptoms resolved faster. Ancient Egyptian medical texts from 1550 BCE document garlic as a treatment for 22 separate ailments, including heart conditions and parasites. You've been treating one of history's oldest medicines like a condiment. That's the equivalent of using a fire extinguisher as a doorstop and wondering why your kitchen keeps burning down. 2. Ginger is the thing your grandmother pulled out when you felt nauseated, and the main ingredient in a cookie that shows up once a year around the holidays. Its entire cultural identity is comfort and nostalgia. Warm, sweet, and completely unthreatening. That reputation has done it a profound disservice because ginger is a potent anti-inflammatory compound that outperforms over-the-counter pain medication in multiple head-to-head clinical comparisons, particularly for muscle pain and arthritis. The active compounds are gingerols and shogalls, and they work by inhibiting prostaglandin and leukotriene synthesis, the exact same biochemical pathway targeted by ibuprofen and other NSAIDs. Same mechanism, no prescription required, no gastrointestinal lining destruction as a bonus side effect. A study published in Osteoarthritis and Cartilage found patients taking ginger extract reported significantly greater reductions in knee pain compared to placebo, with results comparable to conventional anti-inflammatory drugs. For chemotherapy-induced nausea, ginger has been endorsed in clinical oncology literature as an effective adjunct therapy, reducing nausea severity in cancer patients by up to 40%. In a controlled trial, consuming 2 grams of raw ginger daily for 11 days reduced exercise-induced muscle pain by 25% compared to placebo. When ginger is dried or cooked, a compound called 6-shogaol forms, and that specific compound has shown potent activity against cancer cell migration in laboratory studies. You have been storing a natural anti-inflammatory next to your candy collection and buying the pharmaceutical version at a 3,000% markup. Ginger didn't fail you. Your understanding of what it actually does completely failed ginger. 3. Turmeric became the poster ingredient for a certain type of person who carries a reusable cup and says the word inflammation in casual conversation. The backlash was swift. The mockery was satisfying. And somewhere in that cultural exchange, the actual pharmacology got completely abandoned. Curcumin, turmeric's primary active compound, has been studied in over 3,000 peer-reviewed papers and demonstrates measurable effects on inflammation, depression, and neurological function that have nothing to do with the latte it got famous from. Here's where it gets specific. Curcumin inhibits NF-κB, a protein complex that functions as a master switch for inflammatory gene expression. Chronic activation of that switch is implicated in heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, and most cancers. That's not wellness marketing. That's molecular biology. A randomized controlled trial, published in Phytotherapy Research, compared curcumin directly to fluoxetine, the active ingredient in Prozac, in patients with major depressive disorder. Curcumin performed comparably as a standalone treatment without the pharmaceutical side effect profile. Research from UCLA found curcumin supplementation improved memory and attention in adults over 50, with brain imaging showing reduced amyloid and tau plaques, the two hallmarks of Alzheimer's pathology. India has among the world's lowest rates of Alzheimer's in elderly populations, a correlation researchers have linked in part to lifelong high turmeric consumption. There is one critical catch. Curcumin has almost no bioavailability on its own. Combining it with piperine, the active compound in black pepper, increases absorption by 2,000%. The compound works. The Instagram version is just expensive theater with no black pepper. 4. Raw honey is sold next to the pancake syrup and treated with approximately equal nutritional seriousness, which is a catastrophic failure of context. The average person understands honey as sweet, sticky, and marginally preferable to refined sugar because it sounds more natural. Here's what's actually sitting in that jar. A clinically demonstrated antimicrobial agent used to treat antibiotic-resistant wound infections in hospital settings with documented success. Manuka honey, produced from the nectar of the manuka tree, contains methylglyoxal at concentrations high enough to kill Staphylococcus aureus, E. coli, and MRSA in controlled laboratory studies. MRSA, for context, is the bacterium that laughs at most antibiotics. Medical-grade honey products are licensed wound dressings in the EU, Australia, and New Zealand, used in clinical settings for post-surgical wounds, diabetic ulcers, and burn treatment. The antimicrobial mechanism is genuinely sophisticated. Low pH, hydrogen peroxide production, osmotic dehydration of bacteria, and specific phytochemicals, a multi-layered attack that makes it extraordinarily difficult for bacteria to develop resistance, which is precisely the problem destroying conventional antibiotics right now. A WHO review found honey was as effective as dextromethorphan, the active ingredient in most over-the-counter cough syrups, for suppressing nighttime cough in children without pharmaceutical side effects. The critical distinction: processed commercial honey sold in most supermarkets has been heated and filtered to the point where these compounds are largely destroyed. The word honey on the label does not mean the medicine survived the manufacturing process. Raw honey is a field-deployed antibiotic. The processed version in the bear-shaped bottle is just syrup wearing a convincing costume. You bought the costume. 5. Blueberries are described as healthy, with the vague confidence of someone who heard it enough times that it stopped requiring explanation. They have antioxidants. Everyone knows that. Almost nobody can tell you what that means in physiological terms, or what specifically these berries do to the systems inside your body. Here's the mechanism. Blueberries are among the richest dietary sources of anthocyanins, a class of flavonoids that cross the blood-brain barrier, one of the most selective membranes in the human body, and directly influence neuronal signaling. That's not a minor distinction. Most compounds you consume never get near your brain. Anthocyanins do. A study from the University of Exeter found that older adults who consumed blueberry concentrate daily for 12 weeks showed improved blood flow to the brain, better working memory, and improved cognitive performance on standardized testing. Anthocyanins also reduce LDL oxidation, the specific process that converts bad cholesterol into arterial plaque, more effectively than vitamin E supplementation in comparative studies. Research published in Annals of Neurology tracked women over 15 years and found those with the highest blueberry intake experienced cognitive aging rates 2.5 years slower than those with the lowest intake. 2.5 years of cognitive aging delayed by eating a fruit. Wild blueberries contain roughly twice the antioxidant concentration of cultivated varieties due to their higher skin-to-flesh ratio, and frozen wild blueberries retain virtually all those compounds, often outperforming fresh, cultivated ones at the grocery store. You've been putting them in muffins, destroying half the point, and calling it health food. The berry was doing serious neurological work. The muffin was just a delivery vehicle made of sugar and self-deception. 6. Green tea is what people drink when they've abandoned coffee, but haven't abandoned the idea of a meaningful morning ritual. It's mild. It's calming. Its health reputation exists in that soft, unthreatening register where people nod approvingly without anyone specifying what exactly is happening inside the body. What's happening is EGCTG, epigallocatechin galate, one of the most studied polyphenols in existence. It has demonstrated effects on metabolism, cancer cell behavior, and cardiovascular risk that belong in a clinical conversation, not a lifestyle one. EGCG has been shown in multiple studies to induce apoptosis, programmed cell death, in cancer cells, while leaving healthy cells unaffected. That selectivity is a property most pharmaceutical cancer treatments cannot claim without significant collateral damage. A large-scale cohort study in Japan tracked over 40,000 adults and found those who consumed 5 or more cups of green tea daily had a 26% lower risk of death from cardiovascular disease over an 11-year period. EGCG inhibits an enzyme called COMT, which normally breaks down norepinephrine, a hormone involved in fat burning, which is why green tea extract is one of the very few weight loss compounds with legitimate clinical backing rather than marketing support. Green tea has also been shown to reduce fasting blood glucose and improve insulin sensitivity in type 2 diabetic patients across multiple randomized controlled trials. The combination of caffeine and L-theanine present in the tea produces a cognitive state neuroscientists describe as alert calm, measurably different from caffeine alone. You've been treating a clinically studied bioactive compound like a polite beverage for people who can't commit to espresso. It doesn't need your aesthetic framing. It's working regardless. 7. Dark chocolate occupies a strange cultural space where people simultaneously know it's better for them than milk chocolate and also feel vaguely guilty eating it, as though the pleasure disqualifies the benefit. Let's settle this with cardiology. High cacao dark chocolate is a legitimate cardiovascular intervention with measurable effects on blood pressure, platelet behavior, and arterial flexibility documented in peer-reviewed research. And the mechanism is specific enough to be embarrassing for the people who've been avoiding it. Cocoa flavanols, specifically a compound called epicatechin, stimulate production of nitric oxide in endothelial cells, which relaxes and widens blood vessels. That's the same mechanism targeted by pharmaceutical vasodilators prescribed for hypertension. A meta-analysis of 24 randomized controlled trials found dark chocolate consumption significantly reduced both systolic and diastolic blood pressure, with effects most pronounced in hypertensive individuals. The Cosmos Cocoa trial, one of the largest cocoa supplement studies ever conducted, found a 27% reduction in cardiovascular mortality in participants taking cocoa flavanol supplements over a 3.5-year period. Dark chocolate also reduces platelet aggregation, the clumping behavior that triggers heart attacks and strokes, in a manner comparable to low-dose aspirin therapy, without the gastrointestinal side effects aspirin is famous for producing. The threshold that matters, 70% cacao content or higher. Below that, the flavanols have typically been processed out, and you're left with sugar and a story you're telling yourself. You've been apologizing for eating something with documented cardiological benefits. The guilt was always the wrong response. The evidence was sitting right there on the label. 8. Oatmeal is the breakfast you eat when you've accepted that the meal exists for function rather than pleasure. It's beige, it requires effort to make interesting, and its health reputation is approximately as exciting as its appearance. Which is a shame, because beta-glucan, oatmeal's primary soluble fiber, is one of the only dietary compounds in existence with FDA-approved health claims for cholesterol reduction. That is a regulatory bar that most pharmaceuticals work hard to meet. Beta-glucan works by forming a viscous gel in your digestive tract that physically binds to bile acids, which are synthesized from cholesterol. That binding forces your liver to pull LDL cholesterol from your bloodstream to manufacture replacement bile acids, directly lowering circulating LDL levels through a mechanism that is both well understood and clinically meaningful. The FDA approved an oat beta-glucan health claim in 1997, stating that 3 grams daily reduces coronary heart disease risk, one of the earliest food-specific cardiovascular claims ever authorized by that agency. Studies consistently show 3 grams of beta-glucan daily reduces LDL cholesterol by 5 to 10%, sufficient to meaningfully shift cardiovascular risk profiles in borderline high patients without pharmaceutical intervention. Beta-glucan also acts as a prebiotic, selectively feeding beneficial bacterial species in the gut and strengthening immune function through the gut-immune axis. Post-meal blood glucose response is blunted by up to 50% with oat beta-glucan consumption, making it one of the most effective dietary tools for blood sugar management available to pre-diabetic individuals. You've been viewing a cholesterol-reducing, blood sugar-stabilizing, FDA-validated compound as a punishment breakfast. The problem was never the oats. 9. Salmon sits on every healthy eating list with a vague endorsement of eat more fish that functions more like a lifestyle suggestion than a physiological directive. Nobody explains what specifically is at stake or why the body treats these fatty acids as something closer to structural materials than fuel. Here's the specificity. DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, constitutes approximately 40% of the polyunsaturated fatty acids in the human brain and 60% in the retina. It is not optional nutrition. It is foundational architecture. Your brain is literally built from this compound, and your body cannot synthesize adequate quantities without dietary supply. EPA and DHA reduce triglycerides by 20 to 50% in high-dose supplementation studies, an effect so clinically significant that prescription omega-3 medications are now FDA approved for cardiovascular risk reduction. A meta-analysis published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found higher circulating omega-3 levels were associated with a 15 to 18% lower risk of heart attack and a 14% lower risk of cardiovascular death. Omega-3 deficiency is associated with increased rates of depression, ADHD, and cognitive decline. Multiple randomized controlled trials have shown EPA supplementation significantly reduces depressive symptoms, with effects comparable to antidepressant medication in mild to moderate cases. Wild-caught salmon contains significantly higher omega-3 concentrations than most farmed varieties raised on grain-based feed, which shifts the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio enough to reduce the therapeutic value of the fish substantially. You are rationing a brain-building, heart-protecting essential compound because eating fish feels indulgent. That's like skipping structural maintenance and being surprised when things eventually collapse. 10. Walnuts are the nut you grab at a gathering when the more appealing options are gone. They're acceptable. They're fine. Their health reputation exists in that background register where foods get credit for being nuts without anyone examining what specifically is happening when you eat them. Here's what's happening. Walnuts are the only tree nut with significant alpha-linolenic acid content, a plant-based omega-3, and they have demonstrated measurable effects on cognitive function, cardiovascular biomarkers, and gut microbiome composition across multiple clinical trials. The WAHA trial, a 2-year randomized controlled study, found regular walnut consumption in older adults improved LDL particle size, reduced LDL cholesterol by 4.3%, and lowered blood pressure simultaneously. That's 3 independent cardiovascular risk factors addressed by a single dietary habit. Walnuts also contain L-glutanins, which gut bacteria convert into urolithins, compounds with anti-inflammatory and mitochondrial health properties being actively investigated as pharmaceutical anti-aging candidates. A study from UCLA found adults who consumed walnuts regularly performed significantly better on cognitive function tests, with higher scores on processing speed and memory than non-walnut consumers, independent of other dietary factors. Just 1 ounce of walnuts contains 2.5 grams of ALA, exceeding the daily adequate intake recommendation for most adults from a single modest serving. Polyphenols in walnuts have been shown to selectively increase beneficial gut bacterial populations within 3 weeks of daily consumption, with measurable downstream reductions in inflammation markers. You've been ignoring the one snack that's quietly improving your cholesterol, feeding your brain, and restructuring your gut bacteria. Meanwhile, the other snacks were just there for the aesthetics. 11. Broccoli functions as a moral transaction in most people's diets. You eat it, you've technically done the responsible thing, and then you move on. The assumption is that it's green and therefore virtuous, which is the nutritional equivalent of judging a book by its cover and being accidentally right about the plot. Broccoli contains sulforaphane, one of the most potent natural activators of the NRF2 pathway, which is the body's master antioxidant and detoxification switch, with documented effects on cancer prevention, detoxification enzyme induction, and anti-inflammatory gene expression. Here's the part that will make you reconsider every pot of boiling broccoli you've ever made. Sulforaphane doesn't exist in the vegetable. It's produced when glucoraphanin and the enzyme myrosinase, stored in separate cellular compartments, combine through chewing or chopping. Overcooking destroys myrosinase completely, eliminating sulforaphane production entirely. You've been boiling the medicine out of the vegetable and eating what remains. NRF2 activation by sulforaphane upregulates a cascade of detoxification enzymes that neutralize carcinogens before they can damage DNA, described in research as a second-order defense superior to direct antioxidant supplementation. A clinical trial in a region of China with high environmental carcinogen exposure found broccoli sprout beverage consumption increased carcinogen excretion by 60 to 61% within 2 weeks of daily consumption. Broccoli sprouts contain 50 to 100 times more glucoraphanin than mature broccoli, making them among the most pharmacologically dense foods available and among the most underused. You've been steaming it into submission and wondering why you don't feel any different. The broccoli was trying. You eliminated the active compound before it had a chance. 12. Extra virgin olive oil is selected at the grocery store based almost entirely on price point and bottle aesthetics, with health reasoning limited to "it's better than butter," which is a bar so low it barely constitutes a decision. Here is what the research actually says about what you're drizzling on things. The pre-dimed trial, one of the largest dietary intervention trials ever conducted, found that a Mediterranean diet supplemented with extra virgin olive oil reduced major cardiovascular events, including heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular death, by 30%, compared to a low-fat controlled diet over nearly 5 years. The active compound responsible for a significant portion of that effect is oleocanthal, a phenolic compound that inhibits QX1 and QX2 enzymes, the exact same enzymes targeted by ibuprofen. The throat burn you feel from high-quality olive oil is oleocanthal. Low-quality oil doesn't produce that sensation because it lacks the compound. The burn is not an impurity. It's a quality marker. Oleic acid, the dominant fat in olive oil, has been shown to reduce expression of HER2, an oncogene implicated in aggressive breast cancer, in early clinical studies. Extra virgin olive oil also activates autophagy, the cellular cleanup process that removes damaged proteins and organelles through a mechanism similar to caloric restriction. Most supermarket olive oil labeled extra virgin fails quality standards. Studies testing commercial brands find widespread adulteration with cheaper refined oils. Authentic Evo has a harvest date, a single estate of origin, and produces that specific peppery sensation. The medicine is real. What's in most bottles bearing the label is not. 13. Kimchi arrived in mainstream food culture riding the gut health trend, which gave everyone permission to dismiss it as fashionable when the trend faded. That dismissal has nothing to do with the microbiology of what happens when you actually eat it. Traditionally fermented kimchi is a live probiotic food containing multiple lactobacillus species with documented effects on gut microbiome diversity, immune function, and metabolic health in clinical research. A single serving of properly fermented kimchi contains billions of live bacteria, including Lactobacillus plantarum, Lactobacillus brevis, and Lactobacillus sakei, strains with documented evidence for immune modulation and intestinal barrier reinforcement. A 2021 Stanford study found that a high fermented food diet significantly increased microbiome diversity and decreased 19 inflammatory proteins over a 10-week period, outperforming a high-fiber diet for microbiome impact. 19 inflammatory proteins. That's not a minor shift in a wellness metric. That's a measurable reduction in the systemic inflammation implicated in autoimmune conditions, cardiovascular disease, and metabolic dysfunction. Korean epidemiological data shows significantly lower rates of colon cancer compared to nations with similar dietary profiles, but lower fermented food intake, a correlation researchers have linked in part to kimchi's probiotic content. The fermentation process generates bioactive compounds not present in raw cabbage, including short-chain fatty acids and bacteriocins, natural antimicrobial peptides that help maintain microbial balance. Here is the critical distinction. Kimchi made with commercial, rapid fermentation, or pasteurized after production contains no live bacteria. The probiotic benefit exists exclusively in traditionally fermented, unpasteurized kimchi. The trend is irrelevant. The bacteria are the point. 14. Spinach is famous for making a cartoon sailor indestructible, which is simultaneously the most effective and most misleading nutritional endorsement in cultural history. You eat it in salads because it's green, and it seems like the right thing to do, without any clear understanding of what it's actually doing once it gets past your teeth. Spinach is one of the richest dietary sources of nitrates, which your body converts to nitric oxide, a vasodilator that reduces blood pressure and improves oxygen delivery to working muscles. Studies show spinach consumption produces blood pressure reductions comparable to nitrate supplements used specifically for that purpose. A study published in the Journal of Nutrition found that dietary nitrates from spinach improved exercise efficiency in recreational athletes by reducing the oxygen cost of the same physical work by 5%, meaning muscles accomplish the same output using less oxygen. That's not a rounding error. That's a measurable performance gain from a leafy vegetable. Spinach contains lutein and zeaxanthin at concentrations among the highest of any commonly available food, and these carotenoids accumulate specifically in the macular region of the eye. They are the only dietary compounds clinically demonstrated to reduce risk of age-related macular degeneration, the leading cause of blindness in older adults. The iron content spinach is famous for is real, but it's non-heme iron requiring vitamin C for optimal absorption. Eating it with a vitamin C source dramatically increases usable iron uptake. Briefly cooking spinach reduces oxalate content, paradoxically making some nutrients more accessible than they are raw. The cartoon was simultaneously the best and worst thing that ever happened to spinach's reputation. The mechanism is real. The cartoon was just too lazy to explain it properly. 15. Cinnamon's entire cultural identity is sensory. It's warm. It's aromatic. It belongs on certain seasonal beverages and baked goods, and its presence in a food signals comfort rather than pharmacology. That identity has completely obscured what the spice is actually doing at a biochemical level, which is considerably more interesting than its smell. Cinnamaldehyde, cinnamon's primary active compound, activates GLUT4 transporters, the proteins responsible for moving glucose from your bloodstream into muscle cells. That mechanism mimics the action of insulin in peripheral tissues. You're eating a spice that activates insulin signaling pathways. Multiple meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials have confirmed that cinnamon supplementation at 1 to 6 grams daily significantly reduces fasting blood glucose, total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, and triglycerides in type 2 diabetic patients across multiple independent studies. A 2019 study in the Journal of the Endocrine Society found cinnamon supplementation reduced insulin resistance markers and improved metabolic outcomes in women with polycystic ovary syndrome, a condition heavily driven by insulin dysregulation. Here is the critical distinction most people miss entirely. Ceylon cinnamon is the variety studied for these benefits. Cassia cinnamon, which is what roughly 90% of supermarket cinnamon actually is, contains high levels of coumarin, a compound toxic to the liver in the quantities required for therapeutic effect. The species on the label matters because they are not interchangeable products. Cinnamon has also demonstrated antimicrobial activity against certain foodborne pathogens, which is historically why it was used as a food preservative in warm climates before refrigeration existed. You've been sprinkling a blood sugar regulating compound onto things for flavor and purchasing pharmaceutical insulin sensitizers separately. The spice rack and the medicine cabinet are doing overlapping work. 16. Avocado's cultural identity is aspirational brunch, and the health claim attached to it, healthy fats, has been repeated with such confident vagueness that it stopped requiring any supporting explanation. Everyone knows avocados are good for you in the same way everyone knows exercise is good for you. Broadly, abstractly, without anyone being specific enough to make it actionable. Here's the specificity. Avocado is one of the only fruits with significant monounsaturated fat content, specifically oleic acid, which has been clinically shown to reduce LDL oxidation, the process that converts cholesterol into arterial plaque, independent of total cholesterol levels. A study published in the Journal of Nutrition found that adding avocado to a salad increased absorption of carotenoids from other vegetables by 3 to 5 times, because carotenoids require fat for absorption. Eating a fat-free salad dramatically reduces the bioavailability of most of its nutrients. The avocado isn't just a food. It's an absorption enhancer for everything else on the plate. The Avocado Study, a randomized controlled trial, found that daily avocado consumption over 6 months significantly increased gut microbial diversity and short-chain fatty acid production, with measurable downstream reductions in inflammation markers. Avocados contain beta-sitosterol, a plant sterol that competes with dietary cholesterol for intestinal absorption, the same mechanism used by pharmaceutical spreads sold specifically for cholesterol management. Avocado also contains more potassium per gram than most fruits, directly relevant to blood pressure regulation through its competition with sodium's vasoconstrictive effects. You've been consuming a nutrient absorption enhancer, a cholesterol competitor, and a microbiome architect, and describing it as a trendy toast topping. The avocado doesn't need your validation. Your salad does. 17. Yogurt's health reputation rests on 2 things most people have accepted without examination: calcium and live cultures. The calcium is real. The live cultures phrase has become so normalized that it functions as branding rather than information, repeated with the confidence of someone who knows it sounds scientific without knowing what it means, or whether the product they're buying actually contains what it implies. High-quality fermented yogurt is a direct delivery vehicle for probiotic bacteria that modulate immune function, reduce antibiotic-associated diarrhea, influence mood through the gut-brain axis, and improve lactose digestion. All of this documented in clinical literature. Lactobacillus rhamnosus, GG, one of the most studied probiotic strains found in certain yogurts, has level 1 evidence for preventing antibiotic-associated diarrhea, reducing its incidence by approximately 60%. And antibiotic courses cause it in a near universal percentage of patients. The gut-brain axis is a bidirectional communication system between the enteric nervous system and the central nervous system, and studies have found that probiotic supplementation at doses achievable through daily yogurt consumption measurably reduces cortisol, anxiety scores, and psychological distress in randomized controlled trials. Lactobacillus species in yogurt produce lactase enzymes during fermentation, predigesting lactose, which is why most clinically lactose-intolerant individuals can consume yogurt without the symptoms they'd experience from other dairy. Most commercially available flavored yogurts contain enough added sugar to feed the competing pathogenic bacteria you're trying to crowd out. The dose of sugar in many fruit-flavored varieties exceeds that of several well-known desserts. You're adding enough sugar to your probiotic delivery system to undermine the delivery. That's not health food. That's a contradiction in a cup. 18. Pomegranate juice comes in a bottle designed to look like it was developed in a laboratory, costs significantly more than any beverage has reasonable justification for, and makes health claims aggressive enough to inspire immediate skepticism. The skepticism is understandable. The biochemistry, however, is not marketing. Pomegranate contains punic allergens, polyphenols found in almost no other food source, with documented effects on arterial plaque reduction, blood pressure, PSA progression in prostate cancer, and gut microbiome composition that have been confirmed across multiple independent studies. A one-year randomized controlled trial found that daily pomegranate juice consumption reduced carotid artery, intima media thickness, a direct measure of arterial plaque accumulation, by 30% in patients with carotid artery stenosis, while the control group showed a 9% increase during the same period. Punicalagins are converted by gut bacteria into urolithins, compounds with potent anti-inflammatory and mitochondrial health properties now entering pharmaceutical development as anti-aging candidates under the trade name urolithin A. A pilot study published in Clinical Cancer Research found that in men with rising PSA after prostate cancer treatment, daily pomegranate juice consumption slowed PSA doubling time from 15 months to 54 months, a nearly fourfold difference in rate of progression. Pomegranate's antioxidant activity measures at 3 times that of red wine and green tea in comparative testing. Most commercial pomegranate products are sweetened blends containing a fraction of the active compounds. The price isn't marketing. The compounds are genuinely rare, and the research is genuinely real. You've just been buying the version that contains the label and very little of the medicine. 19. Black pepper is at every table on earth. You apply it by reflex, barely look at it, and have given it approximately zero conscious consideration as a substance with physiological consequence. It is the most ignored condiment in human history. Piperine, black pepper's active compound, is a potent bioavailability enhancer that dramatically increases the absorption of other nutrients and pharmaceutical compounds, making it one of the most pharmacologically underestimated substances in your kitchen. Piperine increases curcumin absorption by 2,000% by inhibiting glucuronidation, a liver process that normally eliminates curcumin before it can enter your bloodstream. This is why turmeric without black pepper is almost biologically inert, and why every study showing curcumin working use them in combination. Piperine inhibits P-glycoprotein and CYP3A4, two of the body's major drug efflux and metabolism systems, which is why it enhances absorption of multiple pharmaceutical drugs, including certain antibiotics, antihistamines, and anticonvulsants. This is a clinically relevant drug-food interaction most patients are never informed about by the people prescribing their medications. Black pepper increases the bioavailability of beta-carotene, selenium, vitamin B6, and coenzyme Q10 in human pharmacokinetic studies, suggesting it may function as a systemic nutrient enhancer across multiple dietary compounds simultaneously, not just curcumin. Piperine has demonstrated anti-inflammatory and cognitive-enhancing activity in emerging research, and has shown anti-cancer properties in laboratory studies involving breast and colorectal cancer cell lines. The condiment you've been ignoring is quietly making everything else you consume more absorbable. You have a systemic absorption enhancer at every meal, and you've been treating it like furniture that came with the table. 20. Lemon is what you squeeze into water to make it look deliberate. what you use to make your hands smell less like whatever you were cooking, and what you add to tea when you're sick as a gesture rather than a considered intervention. It functions as decoration in most people's lives. Lemon's vitamin C, flavonoids, and D-limonene content produce measurable effects on immune function, iron absorption, kidney stone prevention, and phase 1 liver detoxification enzyme induction. A set of actions that collectively make it one of the more pharmacologically active items in a standard fruit bowl. Vitamin C is a required cofactor in over 300 enzymatic reactions, and clinical scurvy, complete vitamin C deficiency, produces symptoms within 4 to 12 weeks of depletion, demonstrating how rapidly this nutrient is consumed by normal physiological processes. The ascorbic acid in lemon juice converts non-heme iron from its less absorbable ferric form to its more usable ferrous form, increasing iron absorption from plant sources by up to 67% when consumed together. This is one of the most practical and least known nutritional interactions in everyday eating, and it's free and requires nothing more than squeezing a lemon over your greens. D-limonene, concentrated in lemon peel and largely absent from the juice, has demonstrated induction of phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification enzymes in clinical research, with interest in cancer chemoprevention. Higher dietary citrate intake, which lemon juice provides directly, is associated with reduced calcium oxalate kidney stone formation, and citrate supplementation is a standard medical recommendation for recurrent stone formers. You've been deploying an iron absorption enhancer and kidney stone preventer as a garnish. The lemon is doing serious biochemistry. You've been treating it like interior design. 21. Beets are the vegetable that makes your cutting board look like a crime scene, and your bathroom produce a brief moment of genuine alarm. Their reputation is earthy, their color is aggressive, and their health claim has always been communicated with the vague enthusiasm of someone who knows beets are supposed to be good without being able to articulate what they're doing or why elite athletes have been using them deliberately for over a decade. Beets are among the richest food sources of dietary nitrates at roughly 250 milligrams per 100 grams, which your body converts via salivary bacteria to nitrite and then to nitric oxide, producing vasodilation and blood pressure reduction within 2 to 3 hours of consumption. A study in hypertension found that 250 milliliters of beet juice lowered systolic blood pressure by an average of 10.4 millimeters of mercury within 24 hours, a reduction comparable to antihypertensive medication achieved with a single dietary intervention. Multiple studies in recreational and competitive cyclists found that beet juice supplementation improved time trial performance by 1.2 to 2.8%. A margin considered meaningful at elite athletic levels, by reducing the oxygen cost of exercise at sub-maximal intensities. Betanin, the compound responsible for beets' deep color, functions as an antioxidant with demonstrated protective effects on LDL oxidation. Here is the specific detail that most people using beets for performance miss entirely. The conversion of nitrate to nitrite depends on oral bacteria. Using antibacterial mouthwash before consuming beet juice eliminates approximately 90% of the blood pressure and performance effects by killing the bacteria responsible for the conversion. Elite sports teams have been using beets as a legal performance enhancer. You've been avoiding them because they're inconvenient to clean up after. 22. Kale became the visual centerpiece of a wellness culture that made reasonable people deeply uncomfortable, and the backlash was swift enough to bury any serious examination of what the vegetable actually contains. The enthusiasm was insufferable. The nutritional profile, however, had nothing to do with the people promoting it. 1 cup of raw kale delivers over 600% of the RDA for vitamin K1, which is essential for carboxylation of clotting factors and bone matrix proteins. Vitamin K deficiency is associated with arterial calcification and increased fracture risk, 2 conditions receiving almost no attention in mainstream vitamin K conversations because the supplement industry found vitamin D more marketable. Kale's indole 3-carbinol content modulates cytochrome P450 enzymes in the liver that metabolize estrogen, shifting its breakdown toward less carcinogenic pathways. This is the mechanism behind research associating cruciferous vegetable intake with reduced breast cancer risk, and it has nothing to do with the Instagram accounts that made kale famous. Kale contains lutein and zeaxanthin at concentrations among the highest of any food, directly relevant to macular degeneration prevention, the leading cause of blindness in older adults. The oxalate content in raw kale is lower than in spinach or beet greens, making it one of the safer, high-nutrient leafy greens for individuals prone to kidney stones who still want cruciferous vegetable benefits without the oxalate trade-off. Massaging raw kale with acid or briefly blanching, it breaks down cell walls, reducing bitterness and dramatically improving the bioavailability of fat-soluble carotenoids. The backlash was entirely about the people selling it. The kale was right the whole time and didn't need anyone's approval to keep being nutritionally exceptional. 23. Flax seeds are the tiny specks you add to smoothies as a wellness gesture, small enough to feel responsible without requiring any knowledge of what they actually do. They disappear into the liquid. They have almost no flavor. They function as a performance of health rather than a strategy for it, mostly because nobody has taken the time to explain that what you're consuming is one of the richest dietary sources of lignans in the plant kingdom, with documented effects on hormonal activity, inflammation, and breast cancer risk. Flax seeds contain 75 to 800 times more lignans than any other plant food. Gut bacteria convert these lignans into enterolactone and enterodiol, compounds that bind estrogen receptors and modulate hormonal activity, with documented effects on hormone-sensitive cancer biology. A clinical trial published in Clinical Cancer Research found that women with newly diagnosed breast cancer who consumed 25 grams of ground flaxseed daily for 37 days before surgery showed significant reductions in tumor proliferation markers compared to placebo. 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed provides approximately 1.8 grams of alpha-linolenic acid, the plant-based omega-3 fatty acid, at one of the highest concentrations available from any food source. Here is the detail that renders most flaxseed consumption pointless. Whole flax seeds pass through the digestive tract largely intact because the human gut cannot crack the hard seed coat. Ground flaxseed is the only form that delivers meaningful bioavailability of any of its active compounds. Whole seeds in smoothies are functionally inert. Soluble fiber in ground flaxseed has also demonstrated LDL cholesterol reduction of approximately 10% in meta-analyses. You've been adding whole seeds, getting fiber and nothing else, and wondering why the health world is excited. The medicine requires grinding. The gesture does not. 24. Tomatoes are in salads because they add color and moisture, and everyone puts them in salads. Their nutritional contribution is assumed to be modest, acidic, mildly beneficial, fine. The fact that they've been botanically contested enough to generate a fruit versus vegetable debate has somehow further diminished their standing as a serious food. Here's what's actually happening when you cook them. Processed tomatoes are the richest dietary source of lycopene, one of the most studied antioxidants in human health. And cooking dramatically increases its bioavailability because heat ruptures the cell walls that would otherwise prevent extraction. The lycopene in cooked tomato sauce is significantly more bioavailable than in raw tomatoes. A Harvard study tracking nearly 48,000 men over 6 years found those with the highest lycopene intake, primarily from tomato sauce and tomato-based products, had a 21 to 34% reduced risk of prostate cancer compared to those with the lowest intake. Lycopene has demonstrated cardiovascular protective properties in clinical research, reducing LDL oxidation and improving endothelial function. A meta-analysis found lycopene supplementation reduced systolic blood pressure by 5.6 millimeters of mercury and LDL meaningfully. Tomatoes also require fat for optimal lycopene absorption, which is why the combination of cooked tomatoes and olive oil that forms the base of Mediterranean cooking is not accidental. It's a preparation method that maximizes bioavailability of both foods simultaneously. Sun-dried tomatoes and concentrated tomato paste contain lycopene at concentrations 10 to 30 times higher than fresh tomatoes per gram. You've been eating raw tomatoes in fat-free salads, absorbing a fraction of the lycopene, then buying supplements. Cook the tomato. Use olive oil. Problem solved. Supplement skipped. 25. Beans are budget food. Their social standing in nutrition culture has always been working class. Dependable, unglamorous, and slightly embarrassing to champion enthusiastically in wellness spaces that prefer quinoa bowls and activated charcoal. That reputation has obscured one of the most consistent findings in longevity research. Legumes are the single dietary factor most reliably associated with long lifespan across population studies, appearing as the common thread across virtually every culture on Earth with exceptional lifespan data. The Blue Zone's research, studying the world's longest-lived populations across 5 distinct geographic regions, identified legume consumption as the most consistent dietary predictor of longevity across all 5 groups, regardless of whether the primary legume was lentils, black beans, soybeans, or chickpeas. Different cultures, different legumes, same outcome. Legumes are uniquely prebiotic. Their resistant starch and soluble fiber are fermented by gut bacteria into butyrate, the primary fuel source for colonocytes, the cells lining your colon, strongly associated with colon cancer prevention. A meta-analysis published in the BMJ found that replacing one daily serving of red meat with legumes was associated with a 19% reduction in total mortality risk, one of the strongest dietary mortality associations ever documented. Beans have among the lowest glycemic indices of any carbohydrate-containing food, producing minimal blood glucose elevation despite meaningful carbohydrate content, due to their unique protein-starch matrix that slows enzymatic digestion significantly. Legume consumption is consistently associated with improved LDL cholesterol, reduced blood pressure, lower body mass index, and better glycemic control across dozens of meta-analyses. You've been dismissing the dietary pattern of every long-lived population on Earth because it sounds cheap. Centenarians in 5 different countries aren't embarrassed about beans. They're just still alive. 26. Fermented foods went from ethnic staples that mainstream nutrition ignored to a trend when gut health became a catchphrase, and then became something people felt entitled to dismiss when the trend peaked. The trend is irrelevant to the microbiology, which was operating the same way for thousands of years before anyone coined the phrase gut health and put it on a label. The human gut microbiome contains approximately 38 trillion microorganisms, roughly equal to the total number of human cells in the body. And dysbiosis, microbial imbalance, is now implicated in conditions ranging from obesity and depression to autoimmune disease and Parkinson's. That's not a wellness claim. That's what the research published in the last decade has established. The 2021 Stanford study comparing high-fiber versus high-fermented food diets found the fermented food group achieved significant increases in microbiome diversity and reduced 19 inflammatory proteins, including interleukin-17A, which is associated with autoimmune conditions. The fiber group showed neither effect without first establishing higher microbiome diversity. Fermentation produces specific bioactive peptides not present in the original food. Fermented dairy generates ACE inhibitor peptides, compounds operating through the same mechanism as pharmaceutical blood pressure medications. During bacterial fermentation, geographic populations with the lowest fermented food consumption consistently show lower microbiome diversity and higher rates of autoimmune conditions and inflammatory bowel disease in comparative epidemiological data. The most important practical distinction: pasteurization kills all live bacteria. Most commercially available fermented products in cans or shelf-stable jars are microbiologically dead. The live version requires refrigeration and will eventually spoil. That's not a flaw. That's confirmation that something biologically meaningful is present and working. 27. Sweet potatoes are on every clean eating list as the virtuous upgrade from regular potatoes, endorsed with the frequency and specificity of a recommendation that nobody has been asked to defend. They're orange. They're sweet. They're better. That's usually where the explanation ends. One medium sweet potato delivers over 400% of the RDA for vitamin A precursor, the highest concentration of any commonly consumed vegetable, which converts to retinol for immune function, skin integrity, and vision maintenance. But the beta-carotene story is not the only one worth telling. The glycemic index of sweet potato varies dramatically based on how you prepare it. Boiled sweet potato has a glycemic index of approximately 44, which is low to moderate. Baked sweet potato reaches approximately 94, the same as white bread, because prolonged dry heat converts resistant starch to rapidly digestible glucose. The food that's supposed to be your blood sugar upgrade becomes equivalent to the food you were avoiding, based entirely on your cooking method. That's not a minor nuance. That's the entire argument. A clinical trial studying the white sweet potato variety specifically found that 4 grams daily of dried white sweet potato powder significantly reduced fasting blood glucose and HbA1c in type 2 diabetic patients over 3 months, results comparable to low-level pharmaceutical intervention. Chlorogenic acid in sweet potato has been shown to slow intestinal glucose absorption, potentially explaining why studies in diabetic populations find improved post-meal glucose control, specifically with sweet potato over other starches. You switch to sweet potatoes and then bake them to a glycemic index of 94. The upgrade requires knowing how to deploy it. Otherwise, you've just paid more for orange. 28. Mushrooms are fungi that the food industry reclassified as a vegetable for the convenience of people who build nutritional guides. Their health profile has been described with approximately the enthusiasm typically reserved for uncontroversial administrative tasks. Earthy, versatile, some fiber, fine. That characterization is doing a disservice to a food category that includes compounds approved as cancer adjunct therapies in hospital settings. Shiitake mushrooms contain lentinin, a beta-1,3-glucan approved as an adjunct cancer treatment in Japan, that has been shown in clinical trials to significantly extend survival in gastric cancer patients when administered alongside standard chemotherapy. Japan classified it as a medicine, not a food supplement. Lion's mane mushroom contains haraquinones and arenosines, compounds that stimulate nerve growth factor synthesis, a protein essential for the growth, maintenance, and survival of neurons. A clinical trial in adults with mild cognitive impairment found significant improvements in cognitive function scores after 16 weeks of lion's mane supplementation compared to placebo. Reishi mushroom contains over 400 bioactive compounds, including triterpenes with demonstrated immune-modulating, anti-tumor, and liver-protective activity, and is classified as a medicine in several Asian national pharmacopoeias. Not a supplement, a medicine. Mushrooms are also one of the only plant-source foods that produce vitamin D when exposed to UV light, providing concentrations comparable to a standard supplement dose in UV-exposed varieties. The immunomodulatory beta-glucans in mushrooms operate through receptor pathways on immune cells that train the innate immune system to respond more effectively to both pathogens and aberrant cells. Japan uses one of these compounds in hospital cancer wards. You've been using mushrooms to add texture to things. The gap between those two applications is a choice about what you take seriously. 29. Apple cider vinegar exists at the precise intersection of genuine mechanism and aggressive overclaiming, which has created a culture war between people who think it cures everything and people who find those people insufferable. The pharmacology has been completely buried under the social dynamic of the argument. Acetic acid in vinegar has specific, measurable, documented effects on post-meal blood glucose response, gastric emptying rate, and lipid metabolism, modest but reproducible effects that the overclaiming community overstated and the backlash community dismissed entirely. Multiple controlled studies have demonstrated that consuming 15 to 30 milliliters of apple cider vinegar before a high-carbohydrate meal reduces post-meal blood glucose by 19 to 34% in both healthy subjects and type 2 diabetics. The mechanism is inhibition of salivary and pancreatic amylase activity, slowing starch digestion at the source. Acetic acid also suppresses hepatic glucose production by activating AMPK, an enzyme that functions as a master cellular energy regulator and is the primary target of metformin, one of the most prescribed diabetes medications on Earth. A clinical trial in Japan found that daily vinegar consumption over 12 weeks produced significant reductions in body weight, visceral fat, triglycerides, and waist circumference compared to placebo. The mother, the bacterial sediment people treat as the primary active ingredient, is present in quantities too small to produce measurable probiotic effects. The acetic acid is doing the work. Undiluted ACV consumed regularly causes documented dental enamel erosion and esophageal damage. The acid that creates the metabolic benefit is also the acid that damages tissue when applied incorrectly. Dilute it. Time it before meals. Let it do the one specific thing it actually does well. 30. Eggs have spent decades as the primary target of cholesterol panic, then got rehabilitated, then were questioned again, and their cultural reputation is now defined entirely by whichever macronutrient they're currently being blamed for, rather than what they actually contain. Whole eggs are among the most nutritionally complete single foods available, containing choline, lutein, zeaxanthin, complete protein, and fat-soluble vitamins in a highly bioavailable matrix. And the cholesterol fear that shaped their reputation for decades has been formally revised by the research community that created it. Choline is a nutrient 90% of the population is deficient in, and eggs are the single richest dietary source. Choline is essential for phosphatidylcholine synthesis, acetylcholine production for neurotransmission, and 1-carbon metabolism. The daily adequate intake was only established in 1998 because deficiency symptoms are slow enough to manifest that the connection wasn't made earlier. For most people, the liver compensates for dietary cholesterol by reducing endogenous production, a feedback mechanism that makes dietary cholesterol largely irrelevant to circulating LDL levels in roughly 70% of the population. The individuals for whom dietary cholesterol matters meaningfully, hyperresponders, represent approximately 25 to 30% of people and are identifiable. For everyone else, the fear was never adequately supported by the data used to justify it. The lutein and zeaxanthin in egg yolks are in a fat-associated form, showing significantly better absorption than the same compounds from vegetable sources. A 12-week randomized controlled trial found participants who ate 3 whole eggs daily showed significant increases in HDL cholesterol and HDL particle size, both associated with reduced cardiovascular risk. The villain narrative cost people decades of choline, lutein, and complete protein they couldn't replace with the egg white alternative they substituted in. 31. Red onions are selected at the grocery store based on whether you want something sharper in your salad or something more visually striking on a plate. The health assumption is that they're interchangeable with any other onion, which is interchangeably fine. Some vitamins, some fiber. Broadly beneficial, not worth examining closely. Red onions are among the richest dietary sources of quercetin, a flavonoid that inhibits histamine release from mast cells through the same mechanism targeted by pharmaceutical antihistamines, functions as a senolytic compound targeting senescent cells that accumulate with aging, and has demonstrated blood pressure reduction in multiple randomized controlled trials. Those are 3 entirely separate pharmacological mechanisms in a vegetable you've been choosing for aesthetics. Studies have found quercetin supplementation reduces allergy symptoms with fewer side effects than first-generation antihistamines. Quercetin is classified as a senolytic, a compound that selectively induces apoptosis in senescent cells, sometimes called zombie cells, which accumulate with age and release pro-inflammatory signals without dividing. This is an active longevity research target with significant pharmaceutical investment. A meta-analysis found quercetin supplementation significantly reduced both systolic and diastolic blood pressure across multiple randomized controlled trials, with effects most pronounced in doses above 500 milligrams daily. The outer layers of red onions contain the highest quercetin concentrations, layers most people peel away without consideration. Boiling destroys quercetin as it leaches into the water. Roasting or light sautéing preserves it at far higher concentrations than the cooking method most people default to. You've been selecting onions for their photogenic quality, boiling away the active compound, and discarding the layers with the highest concentration. The aesthetic choice was correct. The preparation was not. 32. Sardines exist in the category of foods people know are healthy and eat with slight embarrassment, as though the choice reveals something unflattering about either their palate or their circumstances. They're canned. They smell like themselves without apology. Their social standing in food culture is essentially the nutritional equivalent of admitting you took the practical option when the impressive one was available. What you're actually eating is one of the most complete nutritional packages available in a single food, delivering omega-3s, vitamin D, calcium, vitamin B12, selenium, and coenzyme Q10 in concentrations that collectively match or exceed what most people are purchasing separately in supplement form. Canned sardines eaten with bones deliver approximately 350 milligrams of calcium per serving alongside vitamin D required for calcium absorption in the same food simultaneously. Sardines provide over 300% of the RDA for vitamin B12 per serving, and B12 deficiency affects an estimated 6% of adults under 60 and nearly 20% of those over 60, with neurological consequences frequently misattributed to aging rather than deficiency. As small, short-lived fish positioned low on the food chain, sardines accumulate virtually no mercury or PCBs, the contamination concern that accompanies larger fish consumed regularly. Sardines also provide coenzyme Q10, a mitochondrial cofactor essential for cellular energy production that is notably depleted by statin medications. The population most likely to benefit from the fish is also the population least likely to be told about it by the people managing their cholesterol. You are paying for 7 separate supplements to replicate what a small, inexpensive tin of fish delivers in a single sitting. The only part of this equation costing you anything unnecessary is the embarrassment. 33. The fact that walnuts anatomically resemble the organ they most benefit has been used as an example of pre-scientific magical thinking. The doctrine of signatures, which held that foods resembling body parts healed those parts. The shape is dismissed as coincidence, and the dismissal of the shape accidentally pulled the clinical evidence down with it. The shape means nothing. The neuroscience does not follow the same pattern. Walnuts are the only tree nut containing significant alpha-linolenic acid, the plant-based omega-3 that serves as a substrate for brain phospholipid synthesis. Polyphenols in walnuts have been shown to reduce oxidative stress and inflammation in brain tissue specifically, reducing protein aggregation associated with Alzheimer's pathology in animal models at dietary doses. The WAHA trial, tracking 636 older adults over 2 years, found that daily walnut consumption significantly preserved cognitive function in the subgroup with lower baseline cognitive scores, with reduced brain aging markers visible in MRI analysis at the end of the study period. Walnut consumption increases production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that promotes neuron survival and growth and is consistently low in individuals experiencing depression. Multiple studies have found inverse correlations between walnut consumption and depression scores in population-level data, independent of other dietary variables. Melatonin found in walnuts at meaningful concentrations has been shown in clinical studies to increase blood melatonin levels after consumption, making walnuts one of a very small number of foods with measurable sleep quality effects. The shape doctrine is nonsense. The neuroscience is not. The walrus accidentally advertised the compound. Dismissing the metaphor caused people to dismiss the medicine it was pointing at. 34. Coconut water got marketed as nature's sports drink with enough beach-adjacent enthusiasm that the backlash became the dominant cultural narrative. And then everyone stopped thinking about it entirely and moved to the next trend. What got lost in that cycle was the actual electrolyte composition, which has specific applications that plain water cannot address regardless of how much of it you consume. Coconut water contains approximately 600 milligrams of potassium per cup, alongside sodium, magnesium, and phosphorus in a ratio that closely approximates the fluid composition lost in moderate perspiration and gastrointestinal illness. A randomized trial comparing coconut water, a commercial sports drink, and plain water for rehydration after exercise found coconut water caused significantly less nausea and stomach upset than the commercial sports drink while achieving equivalent electrolyte repletion. Potassium's role in blood pressure regulation operates through direct competition with sodium at kidney tubule reabsorption sites. Most adults in developed countries consume dangerously low potassium relative to sodium, the inverse of what human physiology evolved to handle. And coconut water addresses 1/2 of that equation meaningfully per serving. Fresh, unflavored coconut water has approximately 45 calories per cup with minimal added sugar. Most commercial coconut water has been sweetened, diluted, or reconstituted from concentrate, producing a nutritionally different product sold under the same name. The electrolyte benefit is context dependent. For sedentary individuals with adequate dietary electrolytes, it offers no advantage over water. For individuals with high sweat rates, gastrointestinal illness, or elevated blood pressure driven by sodium excess, the composition is specifically relevant. The marketing made it insufferable. The potassium doesn't care. Both camps skipped the fine print and missed the application entirely. 35. There is a version of garlic that is substantially more pharmacologically active than what most people are consuming, and almost nobody has been told about it because it requires adjusting a cooking habit rather than buying a supplement. Raw crushed garlic and cooked garlic are not the same medicine. The enzyme alliinase, which creates allicin when garlic is damaged, is deactivated at approximately 60 degrees Celsius. Standard cooking temperatures exceed that threshold within seconds, eliminating most allicin potential before the food reaches your mouth. You're eating the flavor. You're losing the pharmacology. The practical workaround: crush garlic and wait 10 minutes before applying any heat. This allows the allicin formation reaction to complete, generating allicin that is then more heat stable than the enzyme that created it. That single preparation adjustment preserves significant antimicrobial activity through moderate cooking and requires nothing other than 10 minutes and basic foreknowledge. Aged garlic extract, cold processed over 20 months, converts allicin into S-allylcysteine and other stable organosulfur compounds that are more bioavailable and less pungent than fresh allicin. This is the compound most clinical cardiovascular research on garlic is actually using, not the raw clove. Black garlic, produced through prolonged low-heat processing, develops elevated S-allylcysteine content and higher antioxidant activity than both raw and standard cooked garlic, representing a preparation method that enhances bioactivity rather than destroying it. Garlic supplements marketed as odorless have typically been processed to eliminate the sulfur compounds responsible for both the smell and the antimicrobial activity simultaneously. Odorless garlic is frequently pharmacologically inert. You've been choosing the version that's easiest to be around socially, which happens to be the least medically meaningful. That's a trade-off you're making unknowingly, and now you know. 36. Pumpkin seeds are what you scoop out of the vegetable before cooking it. Maybe roast if you're the ambitious type, and otherwise encounter as one of the smaller, less celebrated inhabitants of a nut mix. They occupy background status in the food hierarchy, despite containing a combination of magnesium, zinc, and tryptophan. that addresses deficiencies affecting a significant portion of the population simultaneously. Magnesium deficiency affects an estimated 50% of the population in the United States and is associated with insomnia, anxiety, muscle cramps, hypertension, and insulin resistance. A single ounce of pumpkin seeds provides approximately 37% of the RDA, one of the highest food concentrations of magnesium available from any source. Zinc in pumpkin seeds is notably high at 2.2 milligrams per ounce, in a form more bioavailable than most plant zinc sources. Zinc is essential for testosterone synthesis, immune cell activation, wound healing, and DNA repair, with subclinical deficiency estimated to affect approximately 17% of the global population without awareness. Tryptophan in pumpkin seeds serves as a direct precursor to serotonin and melatonin. Studies have found pumpkin seed extract combined with carbohydrates, which facilitate tryptophan's crossing of the blood-brain barrier, improves sleep quality in individuals with insomnia. A systematic review found pumpkin seed oil supplementation significantly improved lower urinary tract symptoms in men with benign prostatic hyperplasia, with results comparable to some pharmaceutical interventions, potentially through anti-androgenic mechanisms affecting prostate cell behavior. The phytosterol content also demonstrates cholesterol-lowering effects in clinical trials. You've been throwing away the seeds of a vegetable you carved for decoration and purchasing magnesium and zinc tablets separately. The seeds were already there, waiting to be taken seriously. 37. Miso is the small bowl of soup that arrives before sushi. Tempeh is what substitutes for animal protein in certain diets. Natto is the fermented soybean product that almost every person outside Japan tries once, struggles with texturally and olfactorily, and does not revisit. These are described as cultural experiences. The biochemistry running through all of them has nothing to do with cultural framing, and everything to do with specific compounds that pharmaceutical researchers are actively trying to isolate and patent. Natto is the only food source of nattokinase, a fibrinolytic enzyme that breaks down fibrin, the protein matrix of blood clots, with potency that exceeds most pharmaceutical thrombolytics in laboratory comparisons. A clinical study found nattokinase supplementation reduced fibrinogen and factor VII activity, two independent cardiovascular risk markers, in human participants. Fermented soy isoflavones are more bioavailable than unfermented soy isoflavones, because fermentation converts them to aglycone forms absorbed more efficiently in the small intestine. A large-scale Japanese cohort study tracking over 40,000 women found those with the highest miso soup intake had significantly lower risk of breast cancer, a finding that challenged prevailing assumptions about soy's hormonal effects and was attributed specifically to the fermented isoflavone profile. Tempeh contains preformed vitamin B12, one of the extremely rare plant-derived B12 sources, synthesized by bacteria during fermentation, making it relevant for vegetarian and vegan populations, where B12 deficiency rates are clinically significant. The populations consuming these foods daily have some of the longest documented lifespans on Earth. The research and the demographic data are both pointing in the same direction. That alignment is not accidental. 38. Chamomile tea is what you drink when you want to feel like someone who has their evenings under control. It's gentle. It's floral. It appears in every hotel room amenity basket as though it requires no explanation or consideration. Its health claim is relaxing, which barely rises to the level of a biological assertion and is typically accepted without further examination by the people drinking it. Apigenin, chamomile's primary bioactive compound, binds to GABA receptors in the brain through the same receptor complex targeted by benzodiazepine medications. The binding affinity is lower than pharmaceutical benzodiazepines, which explains the gentler effect profile and the complete absence of dependency risk. The mechanism is not analogous. It is the same pathway operating at a different intensity. A double-blind, randomized controlled trial published in Phytomedicine found that chamomile extract significantly reduced generalized anxiety disorder scores compared to placebo over an 8-week trial period. A long-term study found chamomile extract reduced anxiety relapse rates significantly over a 6-month post-treatment period, with implications for maintenance therapy in mild to moderate anxiety that has received almost no clinical attention. Chamomile has also demonstrated anti-inflammatory effects through inhibition of COX-2 and prostaglandin synthesis, entirely separate from its anxiolytic mechanism, making it potentially relevant for conditions where both inflammation and anxiety are co-occurring factors. Bisabolol compounds in chamomile have demonstrated wound healing properties and gastroprotective effects against chemically induced gastric ulcers in controlled studies, a third mechanism operating independently of the first two. You've been drinking a mild GABAergic anxiolytic and calling it a bedtime ritual. That's not inaccurate. It's just describing the pharmacology with so little precision that you had no idea what you were actually doing. 39. Celery is the vegetable that holds dips, quiets your conscience during crudité assembly, and fills volume in soups without drawing attention to itself. Its contribution is assumed to be negligible because it looks negligible. Mostly water, crunchy, effectively invisible once cooked. The compounds inside it do not share its humility. 3-N-butylphthalide, isolated from celery, was found to relax smooth muscle in arterial walls and reduce blood pressure in laboratory studies, leading to clinical investigation as a pharmaceutical candidate. A celery-derived compound is now used as a prescription medication for ischemic stroke in several countries. The vegetable that was holding your ranch dip is the source material for a stroke medication. Celery seed extract has demonstrated uricosuric effects in clinical studies, promoting excretion of uric acid, the compound responsible for gout, with a pilot trial showing reduction in gout attack frequency in patients consuming celery seed extract daily. Apigenin in celery, the same compound found in chamomile, has demonstrated cytotoxic effects on multiple cancer cell lines in laboratory studies, including breast, pancreatic, and thyroid cancer cells through apoptosis induction. Celery contains coumarins with demonstrated anti-tumor properties, and epidemiological data suggests diets high in coumarin-containing vegetables correlate with lower rates of tobacco-related cancers. The water content of celery, approximately 95%, produces meaningful satiety with negligible caloric input, making it one of the most effective appetite management tools available through pure physics rather than pharmacology. A compound derived from celery is a prescription stroke treatment in multiple countries. You've been eating the source material as a dip delivery mechanism and assuming it contributes nothing. It was overqualified for the job you assigned it. 40. Bone broth arrived in wellness culture, riding enough enthusiasm to generate immediate suspicion among people who view nutritional trends as consumer manipulation in disguise. The backlash was proportionate to the hype and equally imprecise. Both camps bypass the actual contents. Long-simmered bone broth contains glycine, proline, hydroxyproline, gelatin, and specific glycosaminoglycans, compounds with documented effects on joint tissue, gut barrier integrity, sleep quality, and skin collagen synthesis, that exist in concentrations not achievable through short cooking times or commercial broth products. Glycine constitutes approximately 1/3 of collagen's amino acid composition and is conditionally essential, meaning the body cannot always synthesize sufficient quantities under physiological demand. Glycine supplementation has been shown in randomized controlled trials to improve sleep quality, specifically increasing slow-wave sleep, at doses of 3 grams, an amount achievable from regular properly made bone broth consumption. Gelatin from bone broth has been shown in studies to improve joint pain scores in athletes when combined with vitamin C supplementation, with a proposed mechanism involving collagen synthesis support in articular cartilage. Glycine has demonstrated ability to reinforce tight junction proteins in the gut epithelium in laboratory and early clinical models, with implications for conditions driven by intestinal barrier dysfunction. Glucosamine and chondroitin sulfate, among the best-selling joint supplements globally, are present in bone broth at biologically relevant concentrations. The practical test for whether you've made actual bone broth rather than flavored water. It should solidify into a gel when refrigerated. If it doesn't set when cold, it contains insufficient gelatin to deliver the therapeutic compounds. The backlash was against the marketing. The glycine was never fictional. Those are different things. 41. Prunes are the food that functions as a cultural punchline, age-coded, institutionally associated, and comedy shorthand for a demographic that has stopped caring about appearances. Most people under 60 have not voluntarily chosen to eat one. That reputation has obscured clinical research, showing prunes are among the most comprehensively studied foods for bone density preservation in postmenopausal women, with effects outperforming calcium supplementation in specific head-to-head clinical comparisons. A one-year randomized controlled trial found that women who consumed 100 grams of prunes daily had significantly higher bone mineral density in the forearm and spine compared to a control group consuming dried apples, with the prune group preserving bone mass that the control group measurably lost over the same period. A follow-up study found that as few as 50 grams of prunes daily, 5 to 6 prunes, was sufficient to prevent bone loss in postmenopausal women. Researchers attributed this to prunes' unique combination of polyphenols, vitamin K, boron, and their demonstrated ability to suppress osteoclast activity, the cellular process responsible for bone resorption. The laxative effect has two distinct mechanisms. Sorbitol draws water into the colon by osmosis, and dihydroxyphenyl isatin stimulates intestinal contractions. This combination explains why prunes are more consistently effective than most fiber-only interventions for the same purpose. Prunes are among the highest dietary sources of chlorogenic acid, the same polyphenol found in coffee, with demonstrated anti-inflammatory and blood glucose modulating properties. The food that's been the punchline of every institutional cafeteria joke is actively protecting bone density, better than the calcium supplements most doctors default to recommending. The joke was always on the person laughing. 42. Ripe bananas are a simple, pleasant fruit, and the idea that ripeness level matters biochemically feels like the kind of pedantry reserved for people with food science degrees and too much time to spend in grocery stores evaluating produce. A banana is a banana, except it's not, and the difference between an unripe green banana and a fully ripe yellow one is a difference in biochemical composition significant enough to produce entirely different physiological responses. An unripe green banana contains approximately 70% of its carbohydrate content as resistant starch. As the banana ripens to full yellow with brown spots, resistant starch falls to approximately 3%, converted by the banana's own amylase enzymes into readily digestible simple sugars. The food hasn't changed in appearance dramatically. Its metabolism has changed completely. Resistant starch reaches the colon undigested, where it is fermented by bifidobacterium and lactobacillus species, producing butyrate, the primary fuel source for colonocytes and a compound strongly associated with colon cancer prevention. Studies have shown incorporating 20 to 30 grams of resistant starch daily for 4 weeks significantly increases populations of beneficial gut bacteria, including species associated with lean body mass and metabolic health. Resistant starch consumption also produces a second meal effect, measurably reducing blood glucose response to a subsequent meal several hours later, demonstrating that its effects extend beyond immediate digestion into the next eating occasion. Cooking starchy foods like potatoes or rice and then cooling them before reheating converts a portion of digestible starch to resistant starch through retrogradation, meaning temperature at serving time changes the metabolic impact of the same food. You've been eating the version that's essentially a sugar delivery device, while the version with measurable prebiotic benefit sits in the bowl, looking underappreciated. The timing of when you eat the banana changes what the banana fundamentally is. 43. Seaweed is what wraps sushi, what washes up on beaches, and what certain health influencers blend into things that turn an alarming shade of green. For most people in landlocked locations, it belongs to the category of foods they acknowledge without engaging, filed under ethnic ingredients they respect from a distance. Seaweed is the only significant dietary source of iodine outside of iodized salt, contains fucoidins and alginates with documented antiviral and anti-cancer properties, and provides omega-3 DHA in its original plant form. The actual source from which fish themselves obtain it, a fact that reorganizes the entire logic of fish consumption. Iodine is essential for thyroid hormone synthesis, and iodine deficiency is the world's most prevalent preventable cause of cognitive impairment, affecting an estimated 2 billion people globally. A single sheet of nori provides approximately 25% of the RDA. A small serving of kelp can exceed it significantly. Fucoidins, sulfated polysaccharides found in brown seaweed species, have demonstrated antiviral activity against influenza, herpes, and HIV in laboratory studies, and anti-cancer properties through apoptosis, induction in multiple cancer cell lines. Seaweed is the original source of omega-3 DHA in the marine food chain. Fish don't synthesize DHA. They accumulate it from microalgae they consume. Algae-derived DHA supplements are now the recommended omega-3 source for people avoiding fish, providing the same DHA without the bioaccumulation of contaminants that increases with each level of the food chain. Alginates in seaweed form digestive gels that reduce absorption of dietary fat and cholesterol, a mechanism under investigation as a pharmaceutical weight management intervention. Fish get their brain-building fatty acid from seaweed. You've been buying fish to access the DHA they got from seaweed. You can bypass the middleman. The middleman, incidentally, has mercury. The seaweed doesn't. 44. Every few weeks, a new headline tells you coffee is good for you. Then a different study suggests caution. Then a third reframes the entire question around dose or preparation method. And the rational response most people land on is to stop paying attention, because nothing in nutrition stays consistent long enough to act on. That response is understandable and largely wrong. The confusion exists not because nutrition science is unreliable, but because individual studies are consistently misinterpreted, and the foods with the most robust, replicated evidence have been quietly consistent for decades, while the headlines chased the edges. The foods with the strongest evidence across the widest range of health outcomes are not exotic or expensive. Olive oil, legumes, leafy greens, fatty fish, nuts, fermented foods, and whole fruits have shown consistent benefit across decades of cohort studies, mechanistic research, and randomized controlled trials in multiple independent populations with no serious contradictory findings. Nutrition headlines almost universally report relative risk from observational studies without reporting the absolute risk, which is typically a fraction of a percent. That's a communication failure, not a scientific one. The dietary pattern with the largest and most consistent evidence base in all of nutritional science, the Mediterranean pattern, has been replicated across dozens of countries, multiple decades, and numerous health outcomes without meaningful contradiction. The features it consistently promotes are the same features every long-lived population on Earth shares: high plant food diversity, minimally processed whole foods, regular legume consumption, healthy fats from whole food sources, and low ultra-processed food intake. None of that has changed in 40 years of research. Only the headlines have changed. Your kitchen already had the answer. You just stopped trusting it long enough to buy the supplement version instead. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.